The dense canopy of Mirkwood, once a site of civil strife between Thranduil's loyalists and Raelith's rebels, now lay ravaged by weeks of warfare. Charred clearings and felled trees marked where battles had taken place or where destructive alchemical fires had erupted. Yet the forest's defenders had managed to hold the perimeter for a time. That fragile defense crumbled when Sauron, fresh from amassing legions on the borders, pushed with overwhelming force. Orcish infantry, snarling wargs and darker creatures marched relentlessly, eager to carve through Mirkwood's tattered lines. The Watchers stationed at Mirkwood's eastern edge sent desperate word that they could no longer contain the onslaught. Soon, Sauron's tide would wash into the Anduin Vale, threatening all of Wilderland. In a makeshift command post, an old hollowed tree near the forest's heart, Aragorn and Iachavos gathered. Aragorn's tall frame was draped in worn leather and mail, his brow furrowed with worry. At his side, Iachavos leaned over a rough-hewn map of the region, showing broad movements of enemy forces. The descendant of Celebrimbor and master alchemist wiped soot from his brow, frustration etched across his face. "The outer line can't be reinforced fast enough," Iachavos said gravely. "Our watchers report that orcs already swarm the forest roads. If Sauron's vanguard breaks through, they'll reach the Anduin in days, maybe less." Aragorn nodded. "We can't allow that. Mirkwood has enough chaos within without letting the Dark Lord lay claim to it from without." He paused, glancing around at the ragtag assembly of men, dwarfs, and elven rebels who had rallied to their banner. "We'll meet him on the field." Someone entered the hollow tree quietly. Legolas, son of Thranduil, stepped forward with solemn composure. Though he typically bore a gentle spark in his eye, now there was only a sorrowful resignation. "I have heard rumor of Sauron's move," he said. "I cannot stand idle while my father's realm and all of Middle-earth falls to darkness." Aragorn met Legolas's gaze. "Will Thranduil follow us or hinder us?" A grim line formed on Legolas's lips. "He does not see reason. His obsession with the ring blinds him. I can no longer stand by his side." No one spoke for a moment. Iachavos placed a reassuring hand on Legolas's shoulder. "Then stand with us," he said. "We need every sword if we're to check Sauron's advance." Legolas nodded, determination warring with heartbreak. "I'll march with you." While Aragorn, Iachavos, and Legolas prepared to confront Sauron's armies, an entirely different drama was unfolding deeper in the forest. Elrond of Rivendell, accompanied by Borhend of Gondor and other allied leaders, had steeled themselves for a new mission: subdue Thranduil once and for all. Elrond's keen eyes shone with a mixture of pity and resolve as he addressed Borhend in hushed tones. "Long centuries have I known Thranduil. He was once a regal if proud Elven king, shaped by the wounds of the Second Age. But the ring's corruption is merciless. If he cannot be brought to reason, we must ensure he poses no further threat, especially if Sauron is pressing the assault from the east." Borhend's expression was grim. He had come to know the cost of war all too well. Thranduil's downfall won't be easy. Even though many of his loyalists waver, they still fear him. The ring-laden king has formidable power, magical and also psychological. But we have no choice. Our allies risk everything in the open field. We must keep Thranduil from unleashing any more horrors behind their backs. A faint murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled elves and men. Among them stood Dwalin, the gruff dwarven warrior who had fought through numerous trials in this ongoing struggle. Dwalin's braids glinted silver in the lantern light as he hefted his axe onto one shoulder. "We do what we must," he said simply. At dawn's first light, Aragorn and Iachavos led a sizable force eastward through the battered remains of Mirkwood. Legolas, with a handful of rebel elves, scouted ahead, quiet as shadows among the trees. The mood was tense but resolute. Winding paths opened onto the forest's edges, revealing rolling plains already crawling with Sauron's vanguard. Battalions of orcs in black iron, ranks of Easterling spearmen, and lumbering trolls guided by harsh drummed signals. Aragorn paused on a small knoll, scanning the horizon. Wargs howled in the distance. "We'll form a defensive line here," he announced to his captains, pointing to a shallow ridge. "Draw them into a pitched fight. Better to confront them with our backs to the forest than be surrounded in open territory." Yakovos nodded. "I have a final store of alchemical potions that might help. They won't last long, but they could disrupt Sauron's front line." He lifted a leather satchel strapped at his side. "We must use them wisely." Legolas, perched on a nearby trunk, surveyed the field with elven eyes. "They vastly outnumber us," he murmured. "But if we hold them, we buy time for the others to settle matters with my father. One way or another, this must end." As the sun rose further, its pale glow revealed the immensity of Sauron's legion. War horns blew from the enemy ranks, and orcish chanting rattled the air. The Free Peoples braced for impact, forming shield walls and knocking arrows. Meanwhile, deeper in Mirkwood's subterranean palace, Thranduil reigned in solitary splendor, the one ring glinting on his finger with a baleful light. The civil war had left his domain partially in tatters. Loyalist forces were stretched thin, and the unstoppable gloom that once oppressed Mirkwood only seemed to intensify with each passing day. Yet the king's will had not faltered. If anything, it had calcified into an iron-hard determination to impose his vision at all costs. In a grand corridor lined with ruined tapestries, Elrond, Borhend, and their contingent of men and elves advanced. Their footsteps echoed on polished marble floors. Tension hummed in the air. The closer they came to the throne room, the stronger they felt the ring's oppressive presence. To Elrond, it was a heartbreakingly familiar aura, reminiscent of the Second Age's final battles. "By the Valar," he whispered, halting the group. "I can feel it, like a shadow gripping my mind." Borhend tightened his hold on his sword. "We press on. If we falter, the entire realm, maybe all of Middle-earth, will be lost." They reached the entrance to the throne hall, large wooden doors reinforced with gilded carvings. A handful of Thranduil's loyal guards stood resolute but weary. The moment they saw Elrond's group, their eyes flickered with uncertainty. Yet loyalty trumped fear, and they raised spears. Elrond stepped forward, arms wide to show he did not strike first. "We do not wish needless bloodshed," he proclaimed, voice carrying a compelling dignity. "Thranduil has been consumed by a darkness that endangers every living soul here. Stand aside. Let us speak with him." For a moment the guards hesitated. Then one loyalist spat back, "Your words are poison. The king will judge your fate." They attacked. Borhend launched forward, shield raised to absorb the initial spear thrust. The corridor erupted into a fierce melee. Steel against steel, war cries reverberating. Elrond channeled a flicker of elven magic, sending a wave of force that disarmed two guards. Borhend fought with grim efficiency, while other allied elves subdued the loyalists without lethal intent whenever possible. When the battle ended, the guards lay incapacitated, some groaning in pain. Elrond's eyes were filled with sorrow. "This never should have happened," he said softly, stepping past the fallen loyalists. Dwalin trotted up, axe at the ready. "We'll do what we must," he rumbled. "Come on." Out on the plains, Aragorn's force clashed with Sauron's forward units. A deafening roar of orcs signaled the start of the battle. Arrows flew from both sides. Legolas led a team of elven archers, launching shaft after shaft with unerring precision. Their vantage from the ridge offered a deadly advantage, until the trolls rumbled forward, huge clubs pounding the earth. Seeing the trolls approach, Yakovos signaled a small group of alchemist warriors. They hurled glass globes that burst into swirling clouds of caustic vapor. Orcs scattered, howling as the potions burned at flesh and metal. One of the trolls reeled back, clutching its seared face. But the enemy ranks were inexhaustible. An orc captain barked commands, funneling more troops around the ridge. Easterling cavalry, adorned in crimson and gold, galloped to find a weakness in the Free People's flank. Aragorn, sword in hand, directed the Rohirrim riders, who had joined their cause to countercharge. Horses clashed in thunderous collision. Blades flashed under the high sun. The field became a maelstrom of steel, dust, and cries of the wounded. Through it all, Sauron's presence could be felt, an oppressive gloom that seeped into hearts, testing resolve. Yet those who served under Aragorn held the line, fueled by the knowledge that they fought for Middle-earth's last hope. Legolas, perched upon a rock ledge, fired arrows with dizzying speed, each shot cutting down orcs that threatened to overrun the line. "We cannot hold forever," he called to Iachavos between volleys. "We must drive them back somehow." Iachavos clenched his jaw. "There's one last measure," he replied. "A wide-area alchemical shield. But it'll only buy us minutes, and it'll deplete my entire store. Be ready." Simultaneously, Elrond's group penetrated the final corridor leading to the grand throne room. Moonlight crystals still glimmered in the stone walls, but they felt cold and distant. The massive doors were ajar, as if beckoning them inside. Beyond, the throne room stretched in eerie silence, scattered with debris from earlier skirmishes. At the far end, Thranduil stood near his ruined throne, ring-laden hand lifted. Pale hair framed a face twisted by fury and the faintest glimmer of sorrow. "Elrond of Imladris," he intoned. "You come here with mortal men and dwarves, friends of those who would sabotage my kingdom. Have you joined the ranks of conspirators, ready to deliver Mirkwood to Sauron?" Elrond swallowed, stepping forward carefully. "Thranduil, old friend," he began, sorrow lacing his voice. "We have come to stop this madness. The ring has consumed you. Your people suffer. Even as we speak, Sauron's armies assault our allies. We have no time left." Thranduil's laughter echoed strangely in the chamber. "Time is my ally now," he sneered. "While that fool Aragorn bleeds against Sauron's horde, I will finish the rebels once and for all. Then I shall turn the Dark Lord's own ring against him, and this forest shall be free of any menace, be it orc or elf, that stands in my way." Borhen stepped up, sword at the ready. "You threaten the realm you claim to protect. Surrender the ring!" An invisible force emanated from Thranduil's raised hand, slamming Borhen back. The Gondorian crashed onto the marble floor, gasping for breath. Others rushed to help him, but Thranduil's ring-fueled aura was suffocating. That was when Dwalin, stalwart and grim, fixed his gaze on Thranduil. "You speak of dwarves and men as lesser folk. You nearly cost us everything. I won't stand by while you tear Middle-earth apart." Thranduil's eyes flickered with scorn as he directed a wave of psychic energy at Dwalin. The dwarf braced himself. His boots scraped across the slick floor, but he kept his footing. Muscles strained, and a fierce growl tore from his throat. Somewhere behind him, Elrond and the allied elves began weaving protective wards, hoping to shield their group from the worst of Thranduil's onslaught. In that fraught moment, Borben scrambled to his feet, weapon in hand. The allied force fanned out, attempting to encircle Thranduil without stepping into the full brunt of the ring's power. A flicker of sorrow flicked across Thranduil's face. "You cannot stop me," he whispered. "The ring's dominion is absolute." Dwalin charged. A flash of malevolent gold erupted as Thranduil hurled raw energy forward. For an instant, it seemed the dwarf would be thrown back like all the rest, but Dwalin roared, channeling the last reserves of dwarven stubbornness and valor. He planted his axe in the polished floor with a deafening crunch, anchoring himself, then lunged forward again. Surprise flickered on Thranduil's face. A heartbeat later, Dwalin tackled the Elven King. They fell in a tangle of limbs, Thranduil's crown clattering across the ground. For a split second, the ring's aura ebbed in confusion. "Now!" Borhen shouted. Elrond and the allied elves leapt in to restrain Thranduil's arms. Thranduil shrieked with a mixture of rage and fear, thrashing under their combined weight. Yet the ring's power flared again, pulsing like a black star. Invisible force hammered them back, leaving only Dwalin still pinned to Thranduil's chest. Through sheer force of will, the dwarf grasped Thranduil's left hand, prying the ring from his finger. A surge of unstoppable energy ripped through the air. Dwalin cried out, wrenched by an agonizing current of dark magic. With a final, heroic push, he tore the ring loose, flinging it aside. Thranduil let out a wrenching scream as the ring left his flesh and he collapsed. In that same instant, Dwalin's eyes widened. The dark force recoiled into him, sparks dancing along his arms as he sagged to the floor. Smoke curled from his beard and he exhaled in a final, shuddering breath. The dwarf warrior's body went still, his sacrifice complete. Silence crashed upon the throne room. Elrond and the others hovered, stunned. Thranduil lay gasping, bereft of the ring's immediate power. Dwalin did not move. For a fleeting moment, the entire chamber seemed frozen. Then, Borben lurched to Dwalin's side, dropping to his knees. He pressed a hand to the dwarf's charred armor, tears stinging his eyes. "Dwalin," he whispered. "My friend." No answer. The ring, lying on the cold marble floor, glimmered malevolently as if mocking the cost of its severance. Elrond knelt beside Thranduil, turning him onto his back. The fallen king's eyes stared at the ceiling, shock etched across his features. Breathing heavily, Elrond signaled to two elves from his retinue. "Restrain him," he ordered. "We must keep him from reclaiming the ring." Shackles of mithril and enchanted silver were fastened around Thranduil's wrists and ankles, his face contorted in confused anguish. Where?" he mumbled, as though a terrible dream had broken. "Legolas!" Borand, tears streaking his cheeks, gently closed Dwalin's lifeless eyes. "He gave his life," he said softly, voice choking, "to save us all." A solemn hush enveloped the hall. Allies and loyalists alike felt the magnitude of that moment. A dwarven warrior had sacrificed himself to wrest the ring from an elven king. The final barrier to Thranduil's tyranny was removed, at a cost that weighed heavily on every heart. Elrond stood, picking up the ring gingerly with tongs that glowed faintly from wards. He slipped it into a leaden coffer brought for just this purpose. "We cannot destroy it here," he said. "We must keep it hidden until we can decide its fate." While Elrond's forces subdued the chaos in Thranduil's halls, Aragorn's front line continued to teeter on a knife's edge. Iachavos flung his final set of potions into the fray, each bursting into arcs of greenish flame or swirling illusions that disoriented the orcs. Legolas's arrows scythed through the enemy's ranks, thinning their numbers, but not stopping their relentless momentum. From the center of the allied line, Aragorn led a valiant push, sword glinting. "Hold fast!" he shouted, voice echoing above the din. "This ground will not be given!" A tremor shook the earth as a towering troll crashed through the lines. Aragorn raised Anduril, his heirloom blade from the shards of Narciel, and with a sweeping strike crippled the beast's leg. The creature toppled, flattening a swath of orcs beneath it. Still, more enemies flooded in. In that moment, a clarion call soared over the battlefield. Elven horns, long ringing notes reminiscent of ancient battles, joined the fray. A contingent of Mirkwood elves, newly freed from Thranduil's tyranny by the king's abrupt downfall, now poured onto the plain, offering their bows and blades in support. Word had reached them that Thranduil had been chained, that the ring was gone from his hand. Some loyalists saw this as a sign. The realm was bigger than one monarch, and they would not watch Sauron ravage it. The sudden influx of fresh archers and spearmen gave Aragorn's side a renewed edge. The orcs faltered. Easterling cavalry tried a desperate surge, but Legolas rallied the new Mirkwood arrivals to form a spear wall. The defenders battered the invaders back, inch by bloody inch. Iachavos, battered and nearly spent, placed a trembling hand on Aragorn's shoulder. "We have them in disarray, but not defeated," he warned. "Sauron's main force still looms behind the vanguard." Aragorn's face remained resolute. "Then we press the advantage while we can. For Middle-earth, we march!" Back within Thranduil's palace, Elrond's group emerged from the throne room, carrying their chained captive. Allies and rebels parted like a tide, some staring in disbelief at the once mighty Elven King reduced to a prisoner. Thranduil's eyes darted wildly, still under the ring's aftershock, but he made no move to resist. Borhen lingered behind, kneeling once more at Dwalin's side. He felt the sting of guilt and sorrow weigh down his every breath. Dwalin had always worn a fierce grin in the face of danger. Now, that same face lay serene and empty. Borhen clenched a fist. "Your courage saved us all," he whispered. "I promise, your sacrifice won't be in vain." A soft hand rested on Borbei's shoulder. One of the rebel elves, tears in her eyes. "We'll prepare a pyre for him," she said gently. "He deserves the highest honor we can give." Borhen nodded, struggling to keep his composure. Around him, the allied army busied themselves securing the palace, ensuring no pockets of loyalists would spark further conflict. Yet the once proud halls felt hollow, as if Dwalin's death had drained the last vestige of grandeur that Mirkwood's crown jewel once possessed. Elrond, carrying the locked coffer that held the ring, approached softly. "We must rejoin Aragorn," he said. "Sauron's armies cannot be allowed to triumph. Chained or not, will come with us, and the ring must be kept from all hands until it can be destroyed." Borhen bowed his head, then stood, forcing back tears. "Lead on," he said quietly. Outside, the tide of battle gradually turned in favor of Aragorn's coalition. The plain was strewn with orc corpses and battered siege gear. A final wave of Easterling spearmen attempted one last push, only to meet a disciplined volley of arrows from Legolas and the newly arrived Mirkwood elves. Exhausted soldiers cheered in relief as the enemy's front lines collapsed. Smoke drifted across the battlefield, swirling with the stench of iron and ash. Still, a sense of foreboding lingered. This was only a fraction of Sauron's grand host. The main body had not yet descended. Aragorn wearily surveyed the field, sheathing Anduril. "We've held them here, but we can't stay pinned to this location. We need to rally all the free peoples beyond Mirkwood for a larger confrontation with Sauron." "He's not done." Iacobos nodded, shoulders slumped. "If there is to be a final confrontation, we'll need Rohan, Gondor, even the dwarves of Erebor. We stand on the brink of a war that could decide the fate of every realm." Legolas, spotting Elrond and Borhen escorting the chained Thranduil out of the forest, hurried forward. His eyes widened at the sight of his father in shackles. "Father!" Thranduil's gaze flicked up. A flicker of recognition appeared, overshadowed by deep fatigue and confusion. He did not speak. Aragorn's face fell in sorrow at the scene. Then he noticed Borhen's haunted expression. "Borhen," he began, "where is—" The Gondorian looked away, voice trembling. "Dwalin is gone." A hush spread among those nearby. For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. The dwarfs who stood among the allied ranks lowered their heads, grief etched into stern faces. Aragorn placed a comforting hand on Borhem's shoulder. "He will be remembered as a hero," he said quietly. "His sacrifice may have saved us all." When the morning sun broke through the haze, the battered armies of the Free Peoples gathered what strength they could. Word of Thranduil's downfall spread swiftly, and many of his once loyal warriors now joined Aragorn and Elrond, eager to protect Mirkwood from Sauron's inevitable next wave. Thranduil himself remained bound, guarded by elven wards and watchful eyes. He alternated between sorrowful lucidity and outbursts of anger at the ring's loss. Legolas, though pained by his father's condition, committed to the cause. He confided in Iacobos that perhaps in time, Thranduil might break free from the ring's poisonous hold, if the king survived what was to come. At a final war council near the eaves of Mirkwood, Elrond, Aragorn, Iacobos, Legolas, and Borhen conferred with dwarven representatives and newly arrived captains of men. The ring was secured in a chest under multiple spells. While Sauron's immediate assault had been repelled, larger armies still lurked on the horizon. "We can't hold them here forever," Aragorn said, scanning the group. We must unify. Rohan, Gondor, Erebor, Dale. All must come together in a final stand. If we remain divided, Sauron will crush us one by one. Elrond agreed. We will bring Thranduil with us, both for his own protection and to ensure he does not return to the ring. Sauron will not rest until the ring is recovered or destroyed, and we cannot simply hide it. Its corruption is too great. Legolas swallowed, glancing at his father. We must be swift. Boran, leaning heavily on his sword, solemnly nodded. His thoughts drifted back to Dwalin's sacrifice. He closed his eyes. You won't be forgotten, he thought. We carry your memory with us into whatever hell awaits. Even as they made plans to move south and west, reports trickled in that Sauron's main columns had shifted, regrouping for a fresh assault. The free peoples of Middle-earth, still reeling from the internal battle in Mirkwood, now faced the full might of the Dark Lord. Yet for the first time in weeks, a tenuous unity bound them. Men, elves and dwarves, once fractious, now fought side by side. The battered forest behind them whispered of the cost. Charred clearings and broken halls reminded them that Thranduil's ambition had nearly destroyed Mirkwood from within. Now, with the king himself subdued and the ring wrested from his hand, Mirkwood might at last have a chance to heal, assuming Sauron was defeated. Legolas cast one last look at the tall trees that had witnessed so much suffering, remembering simpler days of hunting spiders and singing under starlight. Farewell, for now, he whispered. We'll see you restored, I swear it. Wrapped in chains and guarded by Elrond's personal warriors, Thranduil said nothing as the allied columns began marching. His expression was distant, as if he existed in a half-dream, no longer lord of his own mind. Borhend spared him a final glance. Pity and anger swirled inside him. Dwalin's sacrifice had ended this threat, but at a terrible price. Thus, in the hush of dawn, a reconfigured army left Mirkwood behind. Aragorn and Iacavos leading a vanguard to intercept the next wave of orcs, Legolas guiding stray Mirkwood elves to join the unified coalition, and Elrond's guard holding Thranduil close while Borhend walked at his side, still mourning the dwarf who had paid the ultimate cost. Far away in the roiling gloom of Mordor, the Dark Lord's plans no doubt advanced. But for this day, at least, the Free Peoples had struck a small yet vital blow, breaking Mirkwood's internal tyranny and setting the stage for the coming war with Sauron. And so ended the tumultuous chapter of civil war in Mirkwood. A new chapter dawned, one that would carry them all into the final confrontation with darkness, a confrontation that would decide the fate of the One Ring and the entire realm of Middle-earth.